There are 13 heroes in Midnight Suns. It's a lot. Hunter's got more friends than me, that's for sure.
Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
However, you can only take 3 heroes on each mission, which is still more than I've got.
This is serious. I know. This really is the world's smallest violin. See?
Today we're going to rank all 13 of those heroes and try to find the best hero for you. Let's go. Let me know in the comments your favorite hero, and firstly, literally none of the heroes are bad. They all have different playstyles that are either easy or hard to leverage the best out of their own kits, and that will impact, where they rank on this list. But I'm forcing myself to rank them for entertainment value simply while giving you an overview of all the 13 heroes. None of them are bad, they're all got their strengths. So we'll start with one that I'm not ranking on this list because I don't think it's fair, and that's the Hunter. The Hunter is literally like a god. You are the most flexible party member of the team. You can deal all kinds of damage dealing abilities. You've also got the best healing abilities. You've also got some great support abilities and the options to, give yourself block and counter. The Hunter also has 2 passives in the collar and the suit, and you can really make him fit within any play style, and that's kind of the purpose as it's your playable character. So he doesn't really fit anywhere on this list, but you will take Hunter on basically every mission because of that real flexibility that he has, as well as when you do level him up, the other heroes will level up with him at like a base level. So actual list time now, and we're going to start at the very bottom with Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider potentially has the highest damage output of all of the Midnight Suns. However, his abilities will cost some of Ghost Rider's health, so that trade-off is for high damage impact, you are stealing some of his health. This is a double-edged sword, especially on higher difficulties, which makes Ghost Rider very difficult to use effectively because on the higher difficulties, enemies deal tons more damage. They also have heaps more health, so that trade-off is much more severe. You can alleviate this a little bit with the passive ability for Ghost Rider, which when you fill his souls meter, which is his unique mechanic, he will get more maximum health. So you can alleviate some of that trade-off. However, on the higher difficulties, I've found that it's just not enough. He just takes too much damage in some of those encounters unless you're really, really good with your taunts. Next, we have Magik. Magik is a support hero focused on controlling the enemies with knockback and teleportation through limbo. Magik's limbo portal can be highly effective when used correctly in combat. However, her abilities as a whole do pretty minimal damage. Rather than doing damage, they focus on that knockback mechanic, which can be difficult to find effectiveness if there is nothing to slam the target into, or say you've placed your limbo portal somewhere and there is no longer something there for them to actually hit, which does occasionally happen. So she does have value, and her passive ability Relay will have a chance to immediately draw a new copy of the limbo portal whenever she knocks an enemy through it, and you can increase the damage of limbo with Limbo's grasp. So there is flexibility there, and she does do damage, but I feel that there are characters that do more or less the knockback abilities that Magik does, but with actual damage attached to them is more valuable than just being able to move the enemies around in a lot of those encounters. Moving on to the big guy himself, Hulk. Hulk does tremendous damage at the cost of high heroism. He's a tough hero to master as he needs to constantly take damage to maintain his strength and increasing the damage to his abilities. Hulk's high heroism requirement often makes him hard to use his abilities in missions unless you're pairing him with some sort of support hero like Nico, which can wipe the cost of heroism, or even Doctor Strange, which can just give you a ton of heroism themselves. Whenever Hulk takes damage, he will get rage, which then can be converted into his actual damage output, and he does have a huge health pool, so he's really good on some of the higher difficulties where he might take a lot of damage. You can taunt enemies with him. He's got great damage dealing and AoE abilities. He just needs to be paired correctly with the right heroes to see that success, which, if you are in certain encounters, you don't want to bring those heroes, then you will struggle with it. But Hulk is fantastic to use if you can pair him correctly. The Scarlet Witch is next, and she specializes in area effects, dealing damage and applying status effects to friends and enemies in a large radius. She's highly reliant on enemies being close together and able to hit her area of effect attacks. This can sometimes make it challenging to get the maximum effectiveness out of her, especially if you're combining her with something like a Magik or an Iron Man that's moving characters around and they're not actually close enough together to get those area of effect attacks off with maximum effectiveness. So she can be difficult in those regards, but some of her status effects that she can apply are really valuable to use, and she does have some really interesting cards that are entirely unique compared to other heroes. Her passive ability allows her to apply a negative status effect to enemies that are close to her at the start of her turn, so essentially you want to get her right in the middle of the thick of things and move her around in that regard. So she is a higher difficulty character to get that high impact from, but she's definitely a good option if you do choose to play around with the Scarlet Witch. Doctor Strange is a flexible support hero with abilities based around supporting the team and increasing heroism. However, he also has has some extremely powerful damage options of his own. These damage cards are enhanced by the amount of heroism that you do have. At say 4 or 6 heroism, they will do an exceptionally more damage compared to their normal counterparts. This is really valuable, but the downside of this is that Doctor Strange typically is better used as a supporting character and increasing that heroism to then combo with things like Hulk that we were talking about earlier. However, if you're not getting those card draws right, you can actually use his high damage dealing abilities, which are actually devastating when you do get them off. He's also really good at buffing allies and also drawing cards. Great flexibility with Doctor Strange, and you will definitely see success in some of his card usage as well. Doctor Strange's passive ability, Greater Good, allows him to generate heroism at the start of every turn, so he's really all about that heroism generation and using that heroism effectively in combat. He is a great support hero. The Daywalker himself, Blade, is next. Now, he's an interesting character. Blade excels at dealing damage and can increase his damage even further by applying bleed status to enemies. The downside to this is that bleed itself isn't as useful as it sounds. Bleed only triggers on the target during the enemy's turn and after that they have made their own attack. So because of this, you're basically better off just killing the target rather than like waiting for the bleed like status effect to go off. And so you lose some of that flexibility with Blade as his kit is really based around bleeding. However, Blade still does do really solid damage, and bleed is still a valuable thing to use. He's got great chain abilities that can go together. He doesn't really do any kind of knockback or any supporting abilities. It's really all about himself, the bleed status effect, as well as turning bleed into marked, which will give you some card play refunds when you do apply that marked status effect to enemies. So there is definitely flexibility to Blade. It's just not one of the top heroes. Speaking of support heroes, our next is also a support hero, and that is Nico. Nico is a support hero that has a lot of unpredictability in her kit, and it's offset by the sheer power of her abilities. Now, I did make a video specifically on Nico, so go watch that if you're interested. Nico focuses on buffing allies and debuffing enemies with also some high damage abilities that have random effects, so you can't guarantee who they're going to hit. Now, Nico's randomness can be a bit boom or bust, but you can avoid some of that randomness by setting up the battlefield for her attacks. That allows you to get the maximum value out of some of her abilities like Witchfire, which will deal tremendous damage and it will recast itself when you KO a target. If you get all of the enemies like below that health bracket and then use Witchfire, you'll really see success. So there is a lot of value in that, but the downside is in some cases because of her roulette mechanic that her cards will have random effects. You will be redrawing a lot of her cards, but her passive ability, which will allow Nico to just draw cards when cards are played, is also really valuable because you might actually get some of those better cards or variants of those cards that you wanted, or even just cards from other allies. Lots of value in Nico and a really good support character to pick up. Spider-Man is next, and he is a damage dealing hero focused on chaining abilities to hit multiple targets. He's also an excellent option for environmental attacks as he has a passive that gives Spider-Man a chance to give the elemental attack cost back to you, so it doesn't cost any heroism. And there's also the opportunist card, which will allow you to use environmental attacks with double the amount of damage. So he's got tons of flexibility in his kit, lots of chaining attacks that you can zoom around the battlefield with and like deal damage to minions and enemies and all that, as well as some good AoE as well. His cards are often cheap while having a really high amount of value that you can get from them, whether it be attacking multiple targets or AoE. So there's a lot of flexibility in Spider-Man's use, as well as being able to use those environmental attacks, which you should be doing on like every encounter. So bringing him and getting those environmental attacks off for free is absolutely valuable to do. Wolverine is next. Now, he excels at chain attacks and hitting multiple enemies as well. However, he's also really proficient in self-healing, which makes a lot of sense. Wolverine has great survivability, but few high damage abilities. His attacks are focused on hitting multiple targets rather than high impact damage. Wolverine can self-heal and self-revive, making him a perfect option for tough encounters, especially on higher difficulties, because of that flexibility to bring himself back up if you do go down, as well as heal as well. His passive further pushes this, which will allow Wolverine to heal some health whenever abilities are actively redrawn. So he's just constantly healing in combat. So there's so much flexibility here on higher difficulties to use Wolverine, and he's a great pick to have because of those chaining attacks, as well as the ability to draw cards for himself with things like Berserk and being able to heal without having to rely on the Hunter. Captain America is next. next. He is a tank with great damage dealing abilities with some AoE potential, but he's really one of the better support heroes as well. Now, because of his support capabilities, he can also add block to himself and to the allies as well. Can't heal, but adding block is just as valuable. He also can taunt all of the enemies to himself. He's got some great card drawing abilities as well, like he can draw his own cards as well as allies cards with some solid damage options, some quick attacks. Captain America just has a lot of flexibility and is a great tank and support kind of hybrid mixed together that fits with any real team composition because of that flexibility. You know, you can have everything attacking him. He can be giving block to the allies. He can be helping you with card draws to find the right cards that you want to use, as well as dealing damage with some of his more higher damage effects that he can do. His passive all day allows him to generate block at the start of missions, and as well, once you get it high enough, you can generate block every turn, so he's always going to have block. Captain Marvel is next. Now, she can do insane amounts of damage in her binary state, and binary is unique to Captain Marvel. When you use 3 of her cards, you'll be able to draw the binary card, which will allow you to become binary. It gives you a ton of block, and it also doubles your hero attack and heroic ability damage until that block is removed. So Captain Marvel just will, you know, do insane amounts of damage in this form. What she does lack, however, is support abilities like Captain America. So Captain America is probably a little bit of a better, stronger tank. However, Captain Marvel fits that kind of tank, but also a DPS role because she has that block. She also has some taunt abilities, but she can also generate counter with her passive ability, which will give her counter on every KO. So when she is taking damage, even when in that binary state, she can counter back, and her attacks are actually insane when she's in her binary form. They do tons of damage. And lastly, we got the tech billionaire himself, Tony Stark. Iron Man is a well-rounded character that kind of does a bit of everything in a really good way. So he's got some high single target damage as well as multi-target damage, as well as some like squad support abilities, and the passive that he does have, as well as just the redraw to upgrade ability, makes him extremely flexible and fit in basically every scenario. So redraw to upgrade on his cards essentially means that when you redraw that card, instead of discarding, it will add that additional effect that it does say. A lot of these will just increase the damage, and you can do this, you know, over and over again to increase the damage effect that the attack does do. His passive ability will allow you to generate his own redraws. Redraws are so powerful to try and get the best cards that you do want, as well as just using it with his own kit to just increase his general damage and, you know, potential of the attacks that he does do. He's a fantastic character with some great damage building. Air superiority is like one of my favorite attacks in the game. It just damages literally everything. He's a fantastic character to pick up. Let me know in the comments your favorite character in Midnight Suns. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.